He arrived in Texas in 1943, quiet and exhausted, carrying only a small bag and a stare that never settled. To the guards, he looked like any other captured soldier taken from the desert heat of North Africa. But there was something different in the way he studied every corner of the camp. He kept his distance from the others, listening more than speaking, watching more than reacting. Even on that first day, it was clear he was measuring the world around him, not with curiosity, but with calculation and caution. His name was recorded, his number assigned, yet the guards felt they knew nothing about him. They would only understand much later why he never intended to stay. The sun was brutal that morning, the kind that burned through uniforms and patience. He stood in line with the other prisoners, eyes narrowed, scanning fences and towers. Each movement he made was slow, deliberate, almost practiced in its calm. He gave no trouble, asked no questions, and avoided unnecessary attention. But beneath the surface, he was already dissecting the camp's routines. The whistles, the footsteps, the guard rotations, everything mattered to him. He pretended not to notice the guards watching him back, but he did. He noticed everything, storing each detail the way a man stores hope. When the guards escorted him to his barrack, he walked silently, almost too silently. Most POWs whispered, complained, or tried to joke to break the tension. He did none of that, keeping his hands behind his back, calm and unreadable. The other prisoners glanced at him, sensing something unusual in his composure. He nodded politely, but offered no introduction, no attempt at friendship. He moved to an empty bunk and sat down, observing the room before lowering his gaze. There was discipline in the way he breathed, the way he settled, as if trained for stillness. And yet, inside his mind, every thought pointed toward one direction: escape. Days passed, and he followed every rule without hesitation, earning trust quickly. He worked hard, never argued, and always returned to camp on time. Guards marked him as reliable, maybe even harmless, a man adjusting to captivity. But his fellow prisoners noticed something the guards did not. He never grew comfortable, never allowed himself to relax inside those fences. Every night he lay awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if listening to the earth shift. He rose before dawn, standing at the window, counting steps from one post to another. To others, it looked like insomnia, but it was preparation. At work details outside the camp, he observed the land more than the tasks. He studied open fields, dirt roads, and clusters of mesquite trees scattered across the horizon. The Texas landscape was foreign to him, yet he memorized it with precision. He watched farmers drive their trucks, noting routes and timing without drawing suspicion. He paid attention to distant water towers, smoke from chimneys, anything that hinted at direction. He picked up small pieces of wire, string, or scrap metal when no one noticed. Nothing he collected made sense to others, but to him they were tools. Tools for a plan he shaped silently in his mind. The guards liked him because he caused no problems and kept others calm. Some joked that he would make a good American worker after the war ended. He smiled politely at their comments, though he never promised anything back. His smile was practiced, a mask that never reached his eyes. They thought he was adjusting, slowly accepting his fate behind the fences. But acceptance was never part of his nature, not once in his entire life. He carried a stubbornness that felt carved into his bones, something unbreakable. It was the kind of resolve that made escape not just a desire, but a certainty. Every night he traced invisible maps on the wooden frame of his bunk. He calculated distances based on shadows, guard footsteps, and the wind. He memorized patrol patterns the way a musician memorizes rhythm. To him, survival was not about strength, but about timing and patience. He understood that one mistake would end everything, and so he made none. Each day he waited, watching the camp shift from summer heat to cooler nights. He knew the moment would come, and when it did, he would not hesitate. He would vanish into Texas, leaving nothing behind but questions. He soon realized that the camp gates were not the real barrier keeping prisoners inside. The true barrier was the vast Texas land surrounding them, stretching endlessly in every direction. To many prisoners, that open space felt even more impossible to cross than a wall. But to him, it was an opportunity, a landscape with weaknesses waiting to be understood. He watched dust clouds rise when trucks passed far away, marking secret paths. He studied the flight of birds to sense where water might be hidden. He traced the shape of distant hills with his eyes, learning the land's silent language. Every piece of the world outside the fence became part of his growing plan. Work duties often took him miles from the camp, surrounded by farmland and cotton fields. The guards relaxed on these trips, believing the prisoners had nowhere to run. He kept a calm face, hands busy with simple labor, but his mind was never still. He studied how far the nearest farmhouse was, noting broken fences or abandoned sheds. His eyes always returned to the tree lines, judging which ones offered the best cover. Sometimes he intentionally slowed his pace, letting the group drift ahead of him. In those moments, he imagined stepping quietly into the brush and disappearing. But imagination was not enough for him. He needed the perfect moment. Inside the camp, whispers circulated about a possible escape attempt. Some prisoners joked about tunneling, others about overpowering guards. But he never joined those conversations, never fed dreams he considered foolish. He believed escape was not about courage or numbers, but about silence and precision. And so he listened quietly, using their fantasies to better understand what not to do. Every failed idea shared in the barracks became a lesson he stored away. He learned from the mistakes others only imagined, building a plan that had no flaws. He worked in shadows, trusting no one but himself. At night, he often stood outside the barrack door, under guard supervision. He pretended to stretch or look at the stars, blending into the routine. But in truth, he was counting the seconds between guard footsteps on the gravel. He noticed how some guards dragged their boots, while others walked lightly. He mapped their habits in his mind, predicting their paths before they moved. Certain guards lingered too long near the kitchen, giving him extra time. Others smoked behind the latrines, leaving parts of the fence unwatched. He memorized it all, building the rhythm of the camp like a song only he could hear. The other prisoners eventually grew used to his quiet presence. They respected him, but did not approach him too closely, sensing a distance in his eyes. He carried himself with purpose, even in small actions like folding blankets or washing tools. Some believed he was simply disciplined, a soldier still loyal to old habits. But others felt something deeper, an unspoken certainty in the way he moved. They saw a man who never fully stepped into captivity, not even for a moment. A man whose mind lived beyond fences, beyond barbed wire, beyond orders. They sensed he was waiting for something they could not see. One afternoon, while repairing fences outside the camp, he found what he needed. A narrow ditch ran parallel to a road, deep enough to crawl through unseen. The guards joked loudly nearby, paying no attention to the landscape beneath them. He crouched down, pretending to examine the wire while studying the ditch closely. It curved behind a cluster of mesquite trees, disappearing into thicker brush. Through that brush, a path seemed to lead toward a distant creek. He kept his expression empty, hiding the sudden spark in his mind. For the first time, he had found a route that could make him disappear. That night, he lay on his bunk, completely still, listening to the camp breathe. Rain tapped lightly on the roof, masking the usual sounds of patrols and whispers. It was the kind of weather that blurred footprints and softened the noise of footsteps. He felt every instinct inside him sharpen, as if his body recognized a coming change. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to picture each step of what he planned to do. He imagined the ditch, the trees, the creek, and the dark road beyond. The moment felt close now, close enough to touch. He waited for dawn, knowing the world around him was about to shift. The next morning, he walked to work detail with the same calm expression as always. No one noticed the tension in his shoulders or the way his eyes stayed fixed ahead. He knew the ditch was still there, hidden beneath grass and dry soil. He also knew that the guards would not expect anything unusual on a day like this. Routine made them predictable, and predictability made them weak. As they reached the fields, he glanced toward the road without turning his head. Everything was exactly as he remembered, unchanged and waiting. He tightened his jaw slightly, preparing for the moment he had imagined for weeks. During the morning task, he worked slowly but steadily, avoiding mistakes. Mistakes drew attention, and attention was the enemy of his plan. He stayed near the edge of the working group, close enough to blend in. Yet, every step he took brought him closer to the ditch that hid his hope. He wiped sweat from his forehead, partly from heat, partly from fear. But he controlled his breathing, keeping his heartbeat steady. To the guards, he looked tired but obedient, just another prisoner doing his job. Inside, however, he was calculating seconds with absolute precision. When the guards grew distracted by a broken tool and a loud argument, he acted. He knelt down, pretending to fix a wire that did not need fixing. His hands moved with practiced ease, hiding the real intention behind the motion. As the others focused on the commotion, he slipped sideways into the tall grass. He lowered himself into the ditch, the earth cool against his arms and chest. The noise of the camp faded instantly, replaced by a muffled silence. He crawled forward quickly, pulling himself with elbows and forearms. In seconds, he was gone from sight, swallowed by the land. The ditch was shallow in some sections, forcing him to keep his body pressed close. Thorns caught his sleeves and stones scraped his knees, but he kept moving. He crawled through mud and dust, ignoring the sting in his arms. Every sound above him felt amplified, every bird call a warning. He paused only to listen, making sure no footsteps approached the edge. The smell of dry grass filled his lungs as he pushed forward relentlessly. He knew he had only minutes before the guards noticed he was missing, but he trusted the ditch, trusted the path he had memorized with care. When he finally reached the cluster of mesquite trees, he stopped to breathe. The branches formed a natural curtain, shielding him from the open field. He crouched there, listening for shouts or whistles from the direction of the camp. The silence felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath with him. He wiped dirt from his face, steadying his shaking hands. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. This was the edge of everything he had known for months. One more step, and he would officially be a fugitive. He moved through the brush carefully, avoiding broken twigs or loud footsteps. The creek was close, its faint trickling sound guiding him forward like a compass. He crouched low, letting branches slide across his shoulders instead of snapping. The ground grew softer as he approached the water, leaving deeper prints. He stepped onto a patch of stones to hide his trail, moving with precision. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting light through gaps in the trees. He knelt beside it, washing dirt from his face and arms to disguise his path. Then he followed the creek downstream, using its sound as cover. As he walked, he realized how quiet freedom could be. There were no fences, no guards, no commands shouted in harsh voices. Only the steady rhythm of the creek and the distant call of birds. But freedom carried its own dangers, and he knew the search would begin soon. He scanned the horizon, looking for smoke, roads, or distant farms. He could not stay near the creek forever, but it offered protection for now. He tightened the straps on his worn shoes and kept moving. Texas was wide, wild, and unforgiving, but it was also his only chance. He stayed close to the creek for nearly an hour, letting the flowing water hide his tracks. The trees grew thicker along its banks, creating pockets of shade that helped him move unseen. He stepped carefully over fallen branches, avoiding anything that might crack under his feet. His senses sharpened with every passing minute, listening for distant voices or engines. Occasionally he stopped completely, holding his breath at the slightest rustle of leaves. But each time the sounds came from small animals or wind shifting through the brush. The absence of pursuit gave him hope, but he knew it would not last long. He needed distance, and he needed it fast. Eventually, he left the creek and cut across a field dotted with tall weeds. He moved in a zigzag pattern, avoiding open stretches that exposed him to view. The sun grew hotter, pressing down on him like a weight. Sweat trickled down his back, soaking into his worn shirt. He kept his eyes on a distant line of trees that promised shelter. He walked with determination, never slowing, even as the heat worsened. Each step carried him farther from the camp and deeper into the unknown. He felt both vulnerable and alive in a way he had not felt for months. By midday, he reached the tree line and collapsed behind a fallen log. His legs trembled from exhaustion, and dust clung to his skin like a second layer. He pulled in shallow breaths, trying to steady his spinning thoughts. Escape was only the first part of survival. Now came the harder challenge. He needed food, water, and a direction that would keep him off main roads. He scanned the ground for animal tracks or signs of a nearby spring. The silence around him felt overwhelming, pressing against his ears. But he forced himself to focus, refusing to let panic take root. After resting, he stood and followed a narrow trail made by wildlife. The path weaved through thick brush, offering natural cover from above. He walked slowly now, listening to the rhythm of the forest around him. Every crackling leaf under his boots made him flinch, expecting pursuit. But the woods remained still, indifferent to his presence. He found comfort in their neutrality, a reminder that nature cared nothing for borders. As long as he respected its rules, it might protect him better than any human could. He continued along the path, grateful for the shadows it offered. As afternoon approached, he came across an old fence half swallowed by vines. Beyond it stretched a field that looked abandoned, its soil dry and unused. He suspected it belonged to a farm that had been left behind years earlier. Such places were dangerous because they attracted scavengers and drifters. But they also offered shelter, perhaps even leftover supplies. He approached the fence cautiously, listening for any sign of life. When no voices or movement reached his ears, he climbed over quietly. His boots touched the dry earth with barely a sound. He crossed the field and reached a small wooden shed at the far edge. The door hung crookedly, its hinges rusted from years of neglect. He pushed it open slowly, wincing at the soft creak it produced. Inside, dust floated in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the gaps. There were old tools, broken crates, and empty feed sacks scattered around. Nothing useful at first glance, but he took his time, searching carefully. Near the back wall, he found a rusty canteen buried under debris. He shook it gently, relieved to hear a faint slosh of water inside. As evening neared, he left the shed and returned to the safety of the trees. He sat on a patch of grass, drinking cautiously from the canteen. The water tasted metallic and stale, but it eased the dryness in his throat. He leaned against a tree trunk, letting exhaustion wash over him. The sky turned orange as the sun slipped lower behind distant hills. He listened to crickets begin their nightly chorus, a sound both calming and eerie. This was his first sunset as a free man in months. Yet freedom felt fragile. He knew the night would test him in ways the day never could. As darkness settled over the land, he knew he could not risk making a fire. The glow would be visible for miles, a beacon for anyone searching. Instead, he wrapped his arms around himself to keep warm as the temperature dropped. The Texas night felt colder than he expected, sharp against his damp clothes. He listened to owls hooting in the distance, marking territory he dared not cross. Every sound in the forest seemed louder at night, amplified by fear and exhaustion. But he forced himself to stay alert, knowing danger could come from any direction. The night was his shield, but also his greatest challenge. He waited until the moon rose high enough to light the path ahead. Moving slowly through the trees, he avoided patches of moonlight on the ground. Exposed areas made him feel vulnerable, like a target waiting to be spotted. He stepped carefully over roots and fallen branches, keeping his balance steady. His breath formed faint clouds in the cool air as he focused on each silent step. Occasionally, he heard distant dogs barking, sending chills down his spine. Did not know if they belonged to farmers or search patrols. Either way, he changed direction every time the barking grew louder. Hours passed, and fatigue tugged at his legs like heavy chains. But he refused to stop until he placed more distance between himself and the camp. He reached a small clearing where moonlight spilled across the ground like silver. He hesitated before crossing it, scanning the surroundings for movement. Seeing nothing, he darted across swiftly, keeping his head low. The grass brushed against his boots, whispering softly with each step. On the other side, he slipped back into the cover of thick brush. His heart thundered in his chest, but relief washed over him. Near midnight, he stumbled upon an old cattle trail cutting through the woods. The path was narrow and uneven, marked by hoof prints softened by time. He followed it cautiously, grateful for the clearer footing it offered. The trail wound gently through the forest, guiding him deeper into isolation. He noticed faint signs of fence posts, long fallen and swallowed by moss. This told him the land had once been worked, but was now forgotten. Forgotten land meant fewer eyes, fewer dangers, fewer chances of being caught. He continued along the trail, trusting its quiet promise of safety. Eventually, he heard water again, this time a stronger current than the creek before. He pushed through the brush and found a shallow river flowing steadily south. The water sparkled under the moonlight, moving with purpose and direction. He crouched at the edge, dipping his fingers into the cold stream. It felt cleaner than the canteen water, refreshing against his skin. He filled the canteen carefully, drinking just enough to restore strength. The river tempted him to follow it, offering cover and guidance. But rivers also led to farms and towns, places he needed to avoid for now. He decided to walk parallel to the river instead, keeping it within hearing distance. The steady rush of water served as a natural guide through the darkness. It anchored his sense of direction, helping him avoid getting lost. The forest thinned as he walked, replaced by patches of open land. He moved quickly through these exposed areas, aware of how visible he was. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, searching for threats or shelter. The moon cast long shadows across the grass, stretching like dark fingers. He pushed on, driven by hunger, fear, and determination. As dawn approached, the sky shifted from black to pale blue. He knew he needed to find a hiding place before daylight revealed him. The riverbank rose into a small ridge, covered in low shrubs and tangled vines. He climbed it carefully, moving branches aside to avoid making noise. At the top, he found a hollow between two thick bushes, deep enough to crawl into. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, but it offered protection from view. He settled into the hollow, pulling branches behind him to complete the cover. With exhaustion finally overwhelming him, he closed his eyes to rest. He woke a few hours later to the sound of distant voices carried on the wind. His heart began to race as he pressed himself deeper into the hollow. The voices were faint, but unmistakably human, moving slowly across the land. He held his breath, afraid even the slightest movement would give him away. Footsteps crunched through dry grass somewhere nearby, too close for comfort. He listened carefully, trying to distinguish how many men there were. It sounded like 2 or 3, searching methodically in widening circles. He stayed motionless, hoping the bushes concealed him well enough. The voices grew louder for a moment, then began to fade toward the river. He waited until he could no longer hear their footsteps before moving. Crawling out from the hollow, he checked the surrounding area with caution. His muscles ached from lying still for so long, but he forced himself forward. He knew that search teams would not give up easily, especially so early. Every hour they gained made his chances of survival smaller. He needed to travel farther, into land no patrol would bother exploring. With renewed urgency, he started walking again. As the sun climbed higher, the heat returned with unforgiving intensity. His clothes clung to his skin, damp from sweat and river water. He shielded his face with his hand, squinting at the empty landscape ahead. Shadows retreated beneath trees, leaving him exposed to the harsh light. He rationed the last of the water in his canteen, sipping only when necessary. His stomach growled painfully, reminding him he had not eaten since escaping. He searched the ground for berries or roots, but found nothing safe. Hunger settled into his body, heavy and relentless. By midday, he spotted a cluster of abandoned farm buildings near a distant hill. The roofs sagged and the walls leaned like tired old men, ready to collapse. Still, he approached carefully, knowing danger often hid in forgotten places. Broken fences surrounded the property, and weeds grew taller than his waist. He slipped through a gap in the fence, staying close to the shadows of the structures. Birds fluttered from the rafters as he approached, startled by his presence. The silence that followed felt unsettling, but also promising. Abandoned places meant fewer witnesses. Inside the main barn, dust coated every surface like a thin blanket. Sunlight spilled through cracks in the walls, illuminating drifting particles. He searched quietly, turning over crates and tools in hopes of finding supplies. Most containers were empty, their contents long gone or spoiled. But near the back wall, he found a small burlap sack containing dried corn. It was old and tough, but still edible enough to give him strength. He ate slowly, letting each bite settle in his empty stomach. For the first time since escaping, he felt a small sense of relief. After resting in the barn's shadow, he planned his next move. The abandoned farm offered brief safety, but staying longer was dangerous. Patrols might sweep wide areas as the days passed, searching for clues. He decided to move at dusk when the light softened and shadows stretched. The surrounding land sloped gently toward a distant line of hills. Hills meant caves, rocks, and natural hiding places that could shelter him. He needed higher ground to observe the region and choose a direction. With that decision made, he prepared to leave as soon as night approached. As evening arrived, the air cooled and the sky turned deep orange. He walked away from the farm, leaving no obvious signs of his presence. Each step took him farther from the life he once knew and deeper into uncertainty. But uncertainty felt better than captivity, better than fences and commands. He followed a narrow trail leading toward the hills, guided by fading light. Birds called overhead, returning to their nests as the day ended. The world around him shifted into darkness once more, wrapping him in invisibility. And with quiet determination, he continued his journey into the night. The hills rose before him like dark silhouettes against the fading sky. He climbed steadily, gripping rocks and roots as the slope grew steeper. His legs burned with effort, but he pushed forward without hesitation. Higher ground meant safety, a place to watch without being seen. When he reached the top, he paused to catch his breath and look around. Below him, the land stretched wide and empty, broken only by patches of trees. No lights, no roads, no figures moving in the distance. For the first time, he felt completely hidden from pursuit. He found a narrow gap between two large boulders that formed a natural shelter. It was just big enough for him to squeeze inside, protected from wind and rain. He sat down carefully, grateful for the rocky walls that enclosed him. The space was cold, but its isolation brought comfort. He listened to the quiet night, filled with distant animal calls and rustling leaves. The world felt far away, reduced to shadows and soft echoes. He leaned his head against the stone, exhausted but determined. This small shelter would be his refuge until dawn. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by strange noises in the dark. Sometimes he heard coyotes howling somewhere below the ridge. Other times, branches cracked under the weight of unseen creatures. Each sound kept him alert, but he reminded himself that animals were not his enemy. Humans were the ones he feared, the ones who hunted him relentlessly. He wrapped his arms tighter around himself, trying to stay warm. His thoughts drifted to memories of home, long buried under months of war. In the quiet darkness, those memories felt both comforting and painful. Before dawn, he crawled out of the rocky shelter and stretched stiff muscles. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dew and wild grass. He scanned the horizon for signs of search parties, but the land remained silent. A thin mist drifted across the lower fields, blurring the shapes of distant trees. He took advantage of the early light to plan his route through the hills. Going deeper into them would keep him hidden, but also limit food and water. He needed a balance between cover and survival. After a moment of thought, he chose a path that followed a shallow valley. As he descended the hill, he noticed tracks in the soft dirt, fresh ones. Hoofprints and wagon marks hinted at a ranch or small settlement nearby. He crouched low, studying the impressions with cautious curiosity. This discovery brought both opportunity and danger. A ranch meant livestock, water, maybe even supplies he desperately needed. But it also meant people who could turn him in if they saw him. He weighed the risks carefully, knowing any mistake could cost him everything. In the end, survival demanded boldness, not fear. He followed the tracks from a distance, careful not to step directly on the path. The valley opened into a wide stretch of grassland, bordered by oak trees. He spotted a windmill turning slowly in the morning breeze. Near it stood a small farmhouse with a barn and a fenced corral. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, a sign that someone was awake inside. He crouched behind a cluster of bushes, observing the scene closely. There were no dogs in sight, which eased his tension slightly. Still, he knew one wrong move could expose him instantly. He waited until a rancher stepped outside, stretching and looking toward the fields. The man seemed relaxed, unaware that a fugitive watched him from the shadows. The rancher fed the animals, then walked back into the house, leaving the yard empty. This brief window of solitude sparked a dangerous idea in his mind. If he moved quickly and quietly, he might find water or food near the barn. He scanned the area once more, checking every corner for movement. The moment felt risky, desperate, but necessary. He moved silently along the edge of the bushes, staying low to the ground. The barn door was slightly open, creaking softly each time the wind pushed it. He approached it from the side, careful not to cross open ground too quickly. When he reached the wooden wall, he pressed his back against it and listened. Hearing nothing inside, he slipped through the opening and into the shadows. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and old machinery left untouched for years. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls, illuminating dust in the air. He took slow breaths, calming his racing heart. Inside, he found buckets, tools, and a small supply of animal feed. In one corner stood a metal trough filled with fresh water. He approached it cautiously, then cupped his hands to drink deeply. The cool water revived him, clearing the fog from his mind. He filled his canteen, knowing it might be days before he found more. He looked around for anything useful he could take without being noticed. An old blanket lay folded on a crate, worn but still usable. He tucked it under. His arm, grateful for something to fight the cold nights. As he left the barn, he heard a door slam from the farmhouse. A jolt of fear shot through him, and he ducked behind a stack of hay. He peeked cautiously and saw the rancher walking toward the corral. The man carried a bucket, humming softly to himself, unaware of the danger. The prisoner stayed completely still, praying the rancher wouldn't look his way. The rancher fed the animals and checked the fence line before returning inside. Only when the door closed again did he allow himself to breathe normally. The close call reminded him how fragile his freedom truly was. Knowing he had pushed his luck, he retreated toward the hills immediately. He moved quickly, weaving through brush and tall grass to avoid being seen. His footsteps were lighter now, fueled by both fear and determination. He climbed a ridge overlooking the ranch and watched it from a safe distance. Part of him wondered what would happen if he had asked the rancher for help. But trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not in a land where he was hunted. He turned away from the ranch, choosing the solitude of the wilderness instead. The land stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, yet full of possibility. As he continued deeper into the hills, days began to blur together. He traveled at night and hid during daylight, avoiding any trace of civilization. He survived on whatever he could find, berries, streams, and rare abandoned shacks. The search teams gradually pushed farther south, but he stayed ahead of them. The land became his shield, its silence his greatest ally. Weeks passed, and sightings became less frequent, then non-existent. He grew thinner, rougher, but his determination never faded. Freedom, no matter how harsh, was still freedom. Eventually, the search was called off, and the world assumed he had perished. Some believed he drowned in a river, others that wild animals claimed him. A few thought he collapsed in the heat, buried by the land he tried to conquer. But there were occasional whispers from ranchers in distant towns, stories of a quiet stranger seen briefly at dusk, always alone, always watchful. A man who moved like a shadow and disappeared before anyone could approach. No one ever proved these stories, yet they persisted for years. They spoke of a ghost wandering Texas, neither captured nor forgotten. In time, the legend grew larger than the man himself. People claimed the hills held secrets, that a German fugitive lived among them. Some said he found shelter in a remote canyon, living off the land in silence. Others believed he built a hidden cabin, carefully hidden beneath thick brush. But facts faded, replaced by rumors carried from town to town. The truth was known by no one, not even the soldiers who once guarded him. He had vanished into Texas, swallowed by the wilderness and time. And from that day forward, he was never found again.